They said I was worthless and took my inheritance, but they didn't know one day they'd beg at my feet. My name is Rowan Hale, and everything started the day my father passed away. He was the only person who ever truly believed in me. He taught me how to fix old cars, how to stand up for myself, and how to keep my word. When he got sick, I took care of him until his last breath. I thought my stepmother, Elaine, and my half-siblings, Marcus and Tessa, would at least show me some kindness. I was wrong. At the reading of the will, I sat in that lawyer's office, my hands shaking. I expected to hear my father's wishes, the land he wanted me to have, the small house he built with his own hands. But Elaine smiled that cold, painted smile of hers. The lawyer read out a version of the will I had never seen. Everything, the house, the land, the money, was left to Elaine and her children. Nothing for me. Not even a mention. I couldn't believe it. My father had told me himself that he wanted me to have the property. I tried to speak up, to ask questions, but Elaine leaned forward and said, "Rowan, your father changed his mind. He knew you'd never be responsible enough to handle it." Marcus smirked. Tessa wouldn't even look me in the eye. Later that day, I found the courage to go through my father's old papers, and what I saw broke me. His signature on the will didn't even look right. Elaine had forged it. I knew it in my bones. But no one would believe me. She had the lawyer on her side, and I had nothing. When I tried to argue, Marcus pushed me out of the house, shouting that I was just the mistake Dad made before he found a real family. I stood on the porch that night with a single bag of clothes and my father's old toolbox. The porch light flickered behind me as Elaine closed the door in my face. That house, the one where my father taught me everything I knew, no longer belonged to me. I walked away without looking back, tears burning in my eyes. I slept in my truck that night, parked behind the grocery store on the edge of town. I had nowhere else to go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elaine's smile, heard Marcus's cruel words, and felt the weight of what they had stolen from me. But under all that pain, something else began to grow, anger, quiet and sharp. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought taking everything my father left me would make me disappear. But they didn't know me. I had my father's fire in me. As I sat there in that cold truck, clutching his toolbox, I swore to myself, one day they would regret every single word they said. The nights were long and cold in that old pickup truck. I tried to sleep curled up on the seat, using my jacket as a blanket. The windows fogged up, and every sound outside made me jump awake. I had no home, no family, and only a few dollars left. During the day, I cleaned floors at a gym just to afford food and gas. The pay was small, but it kept me alive. I worked when everyone else was asleep, pushing a mop across shiny tiles, trying not to think too much. When the gym was empty, I would sit in the supply closet during my short breaks. That's when the memories would hit me, my father's voice steady and warm, saying, "You've got the hands for fixing things, Rowan. You just need to believe in yourself." I used to stand beside him in the garage, passing him tools while he worked on his truck. He'd smile at me and tell me that every problem could be solved if you were patient enough to take it apart and understand it. Those words kept echoing in my mind, over and over. One afternoon, after my shift ended, I drove to a small mechanic shop at the edge of town to ask if they needed help. My truck was starting to break down, and I didn't have enough money to fix it. The man who came out to look at it was older, maybe in his 60s, with grease-stained hands and kind eyes. His name was Gideon Reese. He didn't laugh when he saw how bad the truck was. Instead, he said, "Looks like she's been through as much as you." I told him a bit about my situation. Not everything, just enough for him to understand I needed work. Gideon thought for a while, then said I could help around the shop sweeping floors, cleaning tools, and maybe, if I paid attention, he'd show me a few things. It wasn't much, but it felt like hope. Every day after my janitor shift, I went straight to Gideon's garage. I watched how he handled every bolt and wire with care. He didn't rush anything. He taught me how to read the rhythm of an engine, how to listen for what was wrong instead of just looking. He said, "Patience and respect, that's how you fix a machine. Same way you fix a life." I started helping with small repairs, changing oil, checking brakes, replacing spark plugs. My hands got dirty, my back ached, but for the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Gideon didn't treat me like I was worthless. He treated me like someone who could learn, someone who mattered. When I finished a job and the engine came back to life, it gave me a strange feeling, something I hadn't felt since my father was alive. It was strength, quiet and steady. I didn't have a home yet, but I was building something that couldn't be taken from me again. Working with Gideon changed everything for me. Each day at the garage made me feel stronger. He never treated me like a charity case. He expected me to learn, to show up on time, and to do the work right. The more I fixed engines and solved problems, the more I began to trust myself again. I started to believe that maybe I wasn't broken after all. Gideon used to say, "Don't wait for someone to save you, kid. Learn how to stand on your own feet." Those words stayed with me. I began keeping track of every dollar I earned. I slept in my truck less and rented a small room above a diner. It wasn't much, but it was clean and warm. I cooked simple meals on a hot plate and saved every extra penny. I even kept a notebook where I wrote down how much I made each week, how much I spent, and what I could do better. Sometimes, when I was closing the shop, Gideon would talk about the years he built his own business. He told me that running a garage was more than fixing cars. It was about honesty, skill, and reputation. I listened closely, trying to learn everything I could. I didn't know it then, but his lessons were shaping me for something bigger. One evening, while I was grabbing coffee at the diner downstairs, I overheard a couple of locals talking about a huge renovation happening out near the Hale property, my father's old estate. I froze. They said Elaine had turned it into some kind of country-style mansion, adding a pool and fancy landscaping. They were spending big, showing off to the whole town. I drove out there that night. I parked on the side of the road where no one would see me and walked up the dirt path. The sight hit me like a punch. Bright lights glowed through the windows, and I could hear laughter coming from inside. The porch had new railings, the kind that gleamed in the moonlight. My father's truck, the one that should have been mine, sat freshly painted in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Elaine wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. Marcus and Tessa were sitting around a long table, joking like nothing bad had ever happened. They looked happy, comfortable, and completely unaware of what they had done to me. My chest burned. I remembered that night they called me worthless, how they had thrown me out without a second thought. I stood there in the dark for a long time, gripping the fence until my knuckles turned white. The pain that used to make me cry now felt different, heavier, sharper, but clearer too. That night, I didn't cry. I drove back to town with a calm kind of fury growing inside me. If they could build that kind of life with stolen money, then I could build something bigger with my own hands. They took what my father left me, but they couldn't take what he taught me. I was going to rise, not just to survive, but to show them exactly who they had thrown away. One morning, Gideon called me into his office. He looked tired, sitting behind his cluttered desk with a stack of unpaid bills beside him. He told me the garage wasn't doing well. The rent was too high and business had slowed down. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Rowan," he said, "I'm getting old, and this place deserves someone who still has fire left. How would you feel about taking over part of it?" At first, I thought he was joking. I didn't have much money, but he told me he trusted me. He said I could buy in slowly, pay him over time, and make the place my own. I didn't even have to think twice. I shook his hand right there, grease and all. It was the first real chance anyone had given me since my father died. I spent that weekend painting new signs and cleaning the garage from top to bottom. I renamed it Hale Repairs, after my father. Seeing the name on the front wall made something light up inside me. It was small, but it was mine. I wanted people to know my name not because of what I'd lost, but because of what I could do. The days that followed were hard. I worked from sunrise until long after midnight. Sometimes I slept on an old couch in the office, using my jacket as a pillow. I kept a little coffee pot by the workbench and lived on instant noodles. Gideon stopped by most mornings to help, but he let me take the lead. I handled customers, ordered parts, and fixed every car that came in. Soon, people started noticing. A man came in saying his neighbor told him about a young mechanic who charged fair prices and never lied about what was wrong with a car. Then another customer came, and another. Each one left with a smile and told someone else. In a few months, the lot was full of cars waiting to be fixed. Some days I could barely keep up. The big shops around town started to lose customers to me, and I could feel their eyes on my little garage. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I was exhausted, sore, and covered in oil, but I was finally building something that was truly mine. One afternoon, while I was working on an old Mustang, a tall man in a suit walked into the garage. He looked out of place among the smell of oil and the sound of tools. He introduced himself as Dean Kerrigan, a local investor who specialized in small businesses. He said he had heard about my shop from a client who wouldn't stop talking about the woman who fixed cars better than anyone else in town. Dean watched me work for a while, asking questions about how I handled the repairs, where I got my parts, and how many cars came through each week. I thought he was just curious, but at the end of the conversation, he surprised me. He said he wanted to help me expand, not just fix cars, but restore classic ones. He believed there was a market for it, and he wanted to be my partner. At first, I didn't know what to say. I had built everything from the ground up, and I was scared of losing control. But Dean seemed genuine. He didn't want to take over. He wanted to grow the business with me. After a few long nights of thinking and running the numbers, I agreed. Within months, things changed. We bought better tools, hired 2 more mechanics, and started working on vintage cars that collectors brought from other states. The sound of engines and laughter filled the garage from morning to night. I even started getting featured in the local paper, Hail Repairs, the woman bringing old cars back to life. It felt surreal. People finally saw me for my talent, not my past. My name was starting to mean something again, but my family acted like I didn't exist. They still lived in my father's old house, showing off as if they'd built their fortune themselves. I didn't care about them, at least that's what I told myself. Then, word began to spread around town that Elaine's renovation business was in trouble. Clients pulled out, suppliers stopped trusting her, and rumors of unpaid debts floated around. Marcus had made some bad deals, and Tessa's rich husband had left her. I didn't say a word. I just kept working, wiping the grease from my hands while their world slowly began to crumble, the same way they once watched mine fall apart. The news about my family's downfall came little by little. At first, I heard from a customer that Marcus had started some kind of business deal with investors from another state. He was bragging around town about how he'd make millions. But a few months later, the same people who praised him were shaking their heads. The deal had gone bad, and Marcus had lost everything he owned. His fancy car got taken back, and people stopped answering his calls. Then there was Tessa. She had always loved attention, the parties, the expensive clothes, the rich husband. But one morning, I saw her face on the front page of the local paper. Her husband had filed for divorce after finding out she had been spending money they didn't have. The story spread fast, and soon everyone was talking about it. She went from throwing charity events to hiding from cameras outside her house. Elaine tried to keep the family together, but even she couldn't fake her way through it this time. Her renovation company was falling apart. Clients were demanding refunds, and workers were leaving because she couldn't pay them. Her name, once praised in town, had become a joke. She still walked around pretending everything was fine, but I could tell she was desperate. A few weeks later, I overheard 2 real estate agents at a coffee shop talking about a big property going up for sale, the old Hale estate. I froze when I heard the name. That was my father's home. My home. They said the owner was in financial distress and needed to sell quickly. My heart started pounding. That night, I drove out there again. The house looked different, tired, broken in ways I didn't remember. The paint was peeling, weeds had grown over the fence, and the porch light that used to shine so warmly was dead. For the first time, I didn't feel pain looking at it. I felt calm. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, and now that house was nothing more than property to them. But to me, it was a promise, something I had every right to reclaim. I called Dean the next morning. I didn't tell him whose house it was. I just said I wanted to buy a piece of land through the business, and that I wanted to keep my name off the papers. He didn't ask questions, just handled everything quietly. Within a few weeks, the deal went through. The Hale estate, my father's land, belonged to me again, though no one knew it. When I signed the final document, I felt my hands tremble. It wasn't joy or revenge exactly, it was something deeper. After years of being thrown away, I had taken back what was mine, not through luck or pity, but through my own strength. And the best part? They still had no idea. When the sale went through, I kept quiet. No one knew I was the one behind it. Dean handled everything under his name, just like I asked. He thought it was a smart business move, a good piece of land with potential. He didn't know that for me, it was personal. Every paper he signed brought me closer to taking back what was stolen from me years ago. A few weeks later, Dean told me the sale was final. The Hale estate now belonged to our company, and the old owners had been given a notice to leave. He said the woman who lived there, Elaine, was refusing to move out. She kept saying she just needed more time to settle things. I told him I would handle it myself. That weekend, I drove out to the property for the first time as its real owner. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. The yard was overgrown, and the house looked worn down. There were boxes piled near the porch, and I could see Marcus and Tessa arguing beside their car. They looked different, thinner, tired, older. Elaine stood in the doorway, talking to a man from the bank. Her voice was shaky, but she was still trying to sound proud. When she noticed me walking up, she didn't recognize me right away. I was dressed in my work clothes, oil stains on my hands. She gave me a quick glance, assuming I was someone from the company handling the sale. "We just need a little more time," she said quickly. "Please tell the new owner we'll have the money soon." Marcus stepped forward, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. "Whoever's buying this place doesn't understand what it means to us," he said. I almost laughed. The words stung with irony. Tessa just stood there, quiet, clutching her phone like it could save her. I didn't say anything yet. I just walked past them toward the front door. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old memories. The furniture was covered with sheets, and my father's old chair was gone. It didn't feel like home anymore, just a shell of what once was. When the paperwork arrived, I sat down at the same table where they once told me I was worthless. I signed my name slowly, letting the pen glide over the paper. Elaine came in then, ready to beg the new owner to give her another chance. When she saw my signature, she froze. Her mouth fell open, her face drained of color. I stood up and looked her in the eye. She tried to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, the whole house was silent except for the sound of the pen dropping to the table. She finally realized who had bought the estate. The woman she had called worthless now owned everything she had left. And there was nothing she could do about it. A few days after the papers were signed, I went back to the house to make sure everything was cleared out. The moving trucks were gone, and the yard looked empty. I could see my family standing near the porch with their bags and boxes. Their car was packed, but it looked like they had nowhere to go. They had sold almost everything to pay their debts, and now even the house wasn't theirs anymore. When I stepped out of my truck, they all turned to look at me. Elaine's eyes widened, and for a second, I saw something I had never seen on her face before: fear. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days, and Tessa's hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled. They didn't look like the proud, perfect family that once threw me out of this place. Elaine spoke first. Her voice was shaky, but she tried to sound calm. "Rowan, you don't understand what's happening. We just need a little help. We've had some bad luck, that's all. If you could loan us something, we'd pay you back." She said it like we were still family, like nothing had ever happened. Marcus stepped forward next. His eyes were red, and his hands were shaking. "Rowan, please," he said quietly. "I messed up. I lost everything. I didn't mean what I said before. You're stronger than all of us. I just need some time to get back on my feet." Then Tessa started crying. She tried to smile through her tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "We were wrong about you. You didn't deserve what happened." She looked at me like a child begging for forgiveness. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, listening to their words, feeling the wind move through the empty yard. My mind went back to the night they kicked me out, the laughter behind the door, the way Marcus pushed me, the way Elaine smiled as she told me I was nothing. Every word, every insult, was still clear in my memory. Elaine stepped closer, her tone changing. "You're not going to just leave us like this," she said sharply. "We're your family." That was the moment I finally spoke. "No," I said softly. "You made sure I wasn't." They all went quiet. Marcus wiped his face with his sleeve, and Tessa looked down. Elaine still tried to glare, but her voice was weak now. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the keys to the house, and looked at them one last time. "This place belongs to me again," I said. "And you need to leave." I turned and walked toward my truck. None of them followed. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't look around. When I started the engine and drove away, they were still standing in the driveway, broken, silent, and exactly where they had once left me. After they were gone, the house was completely silent. The rooms were dusty, the floors creaked, and most of the furniture was broken or missing. But when I stood in the middle of it all, I could almost hear my father's voice again. This was the place where he taught me how to use a wrench, how to fix things instead of throwing them away. I decided right then that I would bring the house back to life, just the way he wanted it. Every evening after work, I drove out there with tools and paint. I started small, fixing one room at a time. I replaced the old wooden steps, cleaned the walls, and repaired the roof that had started leaking. I kept my father's workshop locked the whole time. I couldn't bring myself to touch it yet. His tools were still there, laid out neatly, just as he had left them. The smell of oil and wood made it feel like he was still around, watching me work. The process was slow, but it felt right. I didn't rush. I took my time sanding the floors, fixing the windows, and repainting the walls in the same colors my father had chosen years ago. Every repair reminded me of something he'd said. Every nail and brushstroke pulled me closer to the peace I had been searching for. The house started to look alive again, like it was breathing. When I finally unlocked the workshop, I stood at the doorway for a long time. Dust floated in the sunlight, and my father's old chair sat beside the workbench. I didn't move anything. I just wiped the tools clean and swept the floor. That place was sacred to me, and I wanted it to stay exactly the way he left it. It was a reminder of where I came from, of everything I had fought through to get back here. One afternoon, Gideon stopped by. He looked around, his eyes full of pride. "You did all this?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled and patted my shoulder. "Your dad would have been proud. You built something real, Rowan. Most people don't get to say that." We sat on the porch after that, drinking coffee as the sun went down. For the first time in years, I felt calm. There was no anger, no bitterness, just quiet. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was proof that I had survived, rebuilt, and kept my promise to the man who taught me how to stand on my own. When Gideon drove away, I stayed outside, watching the lights flicker through the windows. The air smelled like fresh paint and pine trees. I smiled to myself, knowing that everything I had lost I had found again, not through revenge, but through the strength my father had planted in me long ago. Time passed quietly after I finished restoring the house. Word around town was that Elaine and her children had left. No one knew where they went. Some said they moved to another state. Others said they were staying with distant relatives. I didn't really care. All I knew was that they were gone, and the town no longer spoke their names with pride. The people who once looked up to them now whispered about how greed had destroyed them. I didn't feel joy in their downfall. I had already gotten what I needed, peace. My business was doing better than ever, and I finally had more money than I knew what to do with. But I couldn't forget how hard those early days had been, sleeping in my truck, having no one to help me. So, I decided to do something good with what I had built. I started a small program through Hail Repairs to train young women who were struggling, just like I once was. Some of them were single mothers, some had dropped out of school, and others had nowhere to go. I taught them how to fix cars, how to run a business, and how to take pride in their work. Watching them grow stronger and more confident reminded me of myself years ago. Helping them felt better than any amount of money could. It felt like something my father would have been proud of. Even with everything I had built, there was still one thing I needed to do. One afternoon, I drove to the old cemetery on the hill, the one where my father was buried. The road was quiet, and the air smelled like rain. I parked near the gate and walked up the path with a small box in my hand. Inside it were the keys to the estate, the house I had fought so hard to reclaim. When I reached his grave, I knelt down and brushed the leaves away from his name. For a long moment, I just sat there, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the struggle, the long nights of work, and the people who had believed in me when no one else did. I placed the keys beside the stone and whispered, "It's yours again, Dad. I just took care of it for you." The wind moved gently through the trees, and I felt a calmness I couldn't explain. I stood up, looked at the sky, and smiled. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had kept my father's promise, built a life of my own, and turned pain into purpose. As I walked back to my truck, I looked at the house key one last time before leaving it there. My father's words echoed in my mind, and I said quietly to myself, "They called me worthless, but I became everything they couldn't." Do you think Rowan did the right thing by walking away from her family, or should she have given them another chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this.